Hi there, good morning to all of you. On behalf of Infomedics Ratings, it's my pleasant privilege to get in touch with all of you on the eve of the monetary policy of the Reserve Bank of India of June 2021. As you are aware, this is a part of a series we call Reading Between the Lines. What we propose to do here is to follow a data-driven, evidence-based approach because we maintain that if you follow a scientific process, more often than not, you would get it right, although there may be some occasional googlies. The 6-member MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, has held the repo rate unchanged at 4% since May 22, 2020, when it was reduced from 4.4% to 4%. This would also be the 6th consecutive time that the RBI would keep the policy rate unchanged. Why do we say status quo? The basic reason, of course, stems from sticky inflation, decelerated economic growth prospects triggered by the second wave of COVID-19, and, of course, continued uncertainty. Now, given this kind of a macroeconomic backdrop, let us do some kind of a granular analysis which go into the making of June 2021 monetary policy of the Reserve Bank of India. Let me first come to the issue of GDP growth. As all of you are aware that in the last 2 years, particularly since March 2020, there have been a lot of debates and discussion about the GDP growth. Indian economy went into a recessionary phase also. So in view of such large number of debates and discussions, it is important to cut the clutter and connect the dots. If we look at the recent data, we find that pandemic-induced recession caused India's GDP to shrink by 7.3% in FY21, with GDP in Q4, January to March 2021 quarter, growing by 1.6%, which went up from 0.5% in Q3 because of extensive lockdowns and stopped most economic activities. Now, it's our contention that things should not be seen in silo and should be placed in some kind of a proper comparative perspective. So if you view things in a perspective, we find that the economy grew by 4% in FY20 and shrank by 5.2% in FY80. So post 7980, this is the first time when we have a macroeconomic contraction, a macroeconomic shrinkage for the first time in about 40 years. What is of some concern to all well-informed watchers of the Indian economic scene is that extensive restrictions and partial lockdowns could act as headwinds to growth. Key indicators in terms of industry and business activities are still very vulnerable given the low vaccination levels among larger, younger population. At the individual and the household level, public fear and anxiety this time are deeper and have severely hit consumption and demand. The Reserve Bank of India, which has kept its monetary policy loose while boosting liquidity to the economy, highlighted that growth prospects will largely depend on how fast and how effectively the infections could be checked. Now, if we were to look at things in a cross-country framework, we find that compared to other emerging market developing economies, EMDs, India is a laggard in GDP growth. But there are certainly some silver linings. India's high and rising level of foreign exchange reserves is one, and the modest current account surplus is certainly another positive feature of the evolving Indian economy. In this connection, let me highlight some major points which emerged from the RBI's annual report for FY 2021, which were placed in the public domain very recently, I think May 27 to be precise. In terms of this annual report, it has been shown that private consumption expenditure is negative in FY 21 and showed a gradual decline since FY 20. Almost all parameters, whether we look at total consumption expenditure, private, government, gross capital formation in terms of fixed investment, change in stocks, valuable, net exports, all these parameters have shown a declining trend in recent years. In the year gone by, we find that fiscal deficit is placed at 9.3% of the revised GDP, which is lower than 9.5% estimated in revised budget estimates. Google, mobility and other high-frequency data, which were placed in public domain in the third week of May 2021, suggest a decline in activity on all fronts, including retail, grocery, transit stations, and toll collections as compared to March and April. Similarly, FICCI's May 2021 business survey showed that the overall business confidence index plunged to 51.5 in the current survey. Demand conditions deteriorated substantially. Lower household savings due to higher health expenditure incurred in the second wave and fear of a third wave is restricting growth of private consumptions. What is particularly disconcerting is the fact that there has also been permanent impairment to income for many households who have lost jobs or even faced debts. At the global level, things are certainly looking up. Global demand is recovering more rapidly than the domestic market. Key domestic export markets for India, for example, the US, are experiencing relatively better economic momentum boosted by $1.9 trillion US stimulus program and a sharp drop in COVID-19 infections. UK government has also significantly upscaled its vaccination drive. OECD raised its 2021 global growth forecast to 5.8%, but warned that too many headwinds persist as not enough COVID vaccines are reaching emerging market economies, making the world vulnerable to variants. In case of India, growth outlook has decelerated further since May's RBI's policy pronouncements, with greater evidence that inflation headwinds may persist going into H2 second half year, July-December 2021. Should there be some relief on the COVID-19 front, economic normalcy could return. However, while the pace of economic recovery in FY21 turned out to be faster than anticipated. The outlook is marked by several uncertainties and would depend on the evolving trajectory of infections and vaccinations. As the RBI report stressed, a durable recovery will be dependent on continued policy support. Now let us look at the position of inflation and what lies ahead. Retail inflation eased to a 3-month low of 4.29% in April from 5.52% in March, mainly on account of easing of prices of kitchen items like vegetables and cereals. The RBI Annual Report highlighted supply-demand imbalances may continue to exert pressure on food items like pulses and edible oils. Prices of cereals may soften while bumper food grains production occurred in 2020-21. But the surge in wholesale inflation to 10.5% in April from 7.39% in March causes concern. An important cognizable dilemma emerges here. This dilemma relates to checking the inflationary spiral while shoring up the languishing growth in the aftermath of the rising dreaded coronavirus. In this context, the RBI's annual report has highlighted three aspects which are important because the CPI inflation trajectory is likely to be subjected to both upside and downside pressures. The first aspect highlighted is that food inflation trajectory will critically depend on the temporal and spatial progress of the southwest monsoon. Second, some respite from the incidence of domestic taxes on petroleum products through coordinated action by the center and states could provide relief, although international crude prices continue to be volatile. 3. A combination of high international commodity prices and logistic costs may push up input prices across manufacturing and services. In this context, it is important to recall that the government has retained inflation target at 4% with the lower and the upper tolerance band of 2% and 6% respectively for the next 5 years, that is from April 21 to March 26. Now let us come to the issue of surplus liquidity, possibly starting from in Q4, October-December 2021, when the proportion of population vaccinated reaches critical mass, the RBI may start lowering surplus liquidity, raising the reverse repo rate and changing its stance to neutral from the present accommodative stance. Given incipient price pressures and holding all rates steady while extending its government securities acquisition program GSAP is likely. Now, one issue which has evoked considerable debates and discussion is the issue of rate transmission. The rates announced by the Reserve Bank of India and the rates transmitted to the ultimate consumer. In this context, it emerges to that transmission to banks' deposit and lending rates improved significantly on the back of surplus liquidity conditions and the mandated external benchmark system of the pricing of loans for specified sectors. Now, what are the future policy directions? Where do we go from here? The RBI's recent annual report highlighted that the conduct of the monetary policy would be guided by evolving macroeconomic conditions with a bias to remain supportive of growth till it gains traction on a durable basis while ensuring inflation remains within the target. Now let us come to our concluding observations. Amid a multi-speed economic recovery, including within countries and across sectors, age groups, genders, and skill levels, contextual issues include well-calibrated economic policies and strategies to improve access to healthcare and education, support and retrain displaced workers, and strengthen public investment in green projects and digital infrastructure. This is needed to build a more inclusive economies while ensuring macroeconomic stability. On the basis of an objective analysis of the macroeconomic landscape and emerging policy prescriptions, we do not visualize any change in the upcoming policy on the repo rate because of the evolving growth inflation dynamics and the heightened macroeconomic concerns caused by the second wave of COVID-19, which has caused widespread devastation to lives and livelihoods. In sum, no surprises expected. Thank you all for being with us here today. Thank you.